We are slaying monsters.
Don't let the ghosts and the ghouls disturb you, darling.
I was kind of a scared kid.
Yeah, you
sort
were.
of like I was kind of a scaredy cat.
Apparently
right?
you were.
And when my parents took me to Disney, I was afraid of all of the costume characters, and so my dad had to like stand with me with all the costume characters, get my picture taken, because I wanted my picture taken with everybody, but I didn't want. I was afraid of standing with them, and I really, really wanted to go into the Haunted Mansion. Now this was in Disney World in Orlando, in Florida. I really wanted to go in there, and I was terrified to even like look at the place because it seemed like it was so scary. And there was this really adorably sweet woman who I think worked there, who like came out and talked to me and was like, everything's okay, they're not gonna hurt you, like you can do it. And she like convinced me to go in and go through it, and then of course I loved it. But I have no idea who she was. Like I said, I think she worked there. I think that she was just one of the people who like ran the ride or something like that. But I just want to say thank you.
Aw, that's really sweet. Whoever you are.
Wherever you are, for giving me the opportunity to participate in a little good old-fashioned Halloween horror fun.
It's a good lesson in, even as an adult, like things are usually a lot worse in your head than they are once they're going and once they're happening.
Yeah, they are. Like the build up, like what you think it's going to be is much, much scarier and much more terrifying than what it actually is most of the time.
Most of the time, not always. But yeah, I think that the mind is extremely powerful, and you can really convince yourself of a lot of horrible things, especially if you have like one of those like roller coaster minds like I have, those like anxiety fueled minds that just like the scenarios just get more and more horrific, and and then it's not that bad. And
what were it was a theme park for children.
What were they going to do to you?
What were the costume characters really going to do to me? Although I will say, when we watched the parade, the big bad wolf came over and he had salt and pepper in his hand. And he sprinkled salt and pepper on me, and it was traumatizing. Oh. There was nothing in there. He just like sprinkled it, and I thought for sure he was going to eat me. So
that's really cute. You cried, didn't you?
I did. Yeah, I cried while I was watching the parade.
I bet he felt so bad.
He probably did. That poor guy. Like whoever was in that costume, I probably traumatized them. They're like, oh my God, I can't believe I made this kid cry.
Who knows what he's doing now?
Yeah. he's probably like a child therapist.
Yeah, probably. That's amazing.
So that's my Haunted Mansion story. That will come into play a little later.
Oh, really?
Yes, it will.
Okay, I was going to ask, why are we talking about this?
Why are we talking about the Haunted Mansion?
Why are we talking about any of this? Well, because this is part 3. Yes? Yes, part 3 of the Winchester House. Well, the story of Sarah Winchester.
The story of Sarah Winchester, and
We Are Slaying Monsters.
That's right.
And we got Matt here.
Hey.
And I'm EJ.
Awesome. Yeah, so we're going to talk about Sarah Winchester. Continue to talk about Sarah Winchester and the Winchester Mystery House. And today we're going to get into how Sarah and all of her tragic life and her artistic creation in this gorgeous, sometimes we'll say eclectic, in this eclectic mansion, spiraled into the most haunted place in America, if not the world.
Cool.
All right. So when we last left Sarah Winchester, she had been designing and renovating her mansion by herself, using her inherited knowledge of architecture. Despite having no formal construction education, she expanded the property from 8 rooms to over 24, and from 2 stories to 7. This made the Winchester House, or as she called it, Yanata Villa, something of a curiosity in the town of San Jose. Neighbors would walk by and they'd watch, and the reverberation of hammers was nearly constant. At least
suck to live next to that.
Well,
Nobody lived next to it though, right? Because it was
she had 45 acres.
At that point, there was nobody around.
Yeah.
Now there is. Okay.
But the town was populated enough that people would walk by and people would actually start to... It wasn't quite a destination, but people would come and like watch the mansion get built. And according to the rumors, there were people there building all the time.
Mm-hmm. And this, folks, is the true inspiration of HGTV. This is the beginning. You wouldn't have known that people cared about watching something get built until
it's
Sarah
kind
Winchester.
of amazing, right? It's literally just the same blueprint.
It is. It is. Yeah. And they were all those television executives back in the Victorian days were like, I think we got something here, folks.
Yeah. Now we just need TV to put it on.
Exactly.
They kept trying to put it on the radio and it was just hammers over and over again. Like, God, this doesn't do any good.
I got an idea.
Truthfully, Sarah's work on the mansion was far from constant. She mentioned in correspondence that she ceased all building during the summer because she had to wait for the plaster walls to dry. And the work didn't resume until the winter, when the weather was cooler. Mm. And her own drive to do the work seemed to, like, come and go. She said, I became rather worn and tired out and dismissed all the workmen to take such rest as I might through the winter.
Was this every winter, pretty much?
It fluctuated.
Okay.
Sometimes she was like really inspired. Sometimes she wasn't. Remember that she's suffering from very, very intense arthritis that's starting to make it hard for her to even write.
Right.
Her hands are just crippled by it.
And she's only in her 40s at this point still.
She's in her 50s.
She's in her 50s now. Still very early. And I think that the thing that I wanted to sort of like land on is that she wasn't in a constant building process.
Oh, no.
It wasn't 24/7 every day.
No. And I mean, this is not the narrative, right? Now the narrative is Sarah was holding nightly seances where the dead were telling her what to build next. Mm-hmm. Or that later on there were the rumors that she would die when the construction ended. So she had to just keep going. Yeah. But really, you have this aging woman driven to do what she can herself, because she's designing everything herself, and she's actually running up against her failing body as she's trying. So we're talking like late 50s, right? And she's living in a perpetually unfinished house, and it has been for a decade. This could be the reason that Sarah invited her niece, Miriam, or Daisy Merriman, to stay with her. Now, Daisy moved in with Sarah in 1890 and left her family and their vineyard business behind. Daisy's 21 at the time. She's whip smart and she's socially conscious. And she quickly became really close with her aunt, who she called Sally.
Oh.
Yeah, not Sarah, but Sally.
Okay.
That was, her friends called her Sally.
Okay.
That's her nickname.
It's like her nickname. Mm-hmm. Okay.
Daisy served as Sarah's administrative assistant, and she took over most of her business affairs for the next decade or so. It's likely that Sarah had been donating to charity for some time, but with Daisy, we start to see evidence of her contributions. She and Daisy, we know, donated to the Red Cross and the associated charities, two centralized charitable nonprofits. It's hard to determine where Sarah actually donated her money because she was very fond of giving anonymously.
I like that about her.
Yeah. And it's cool. It's just unfortunate because the vast majority of her donations are probably lost to history.
So we know all this money went out to these charities, but the charities don't have record of the name that all this money came to.
It's just an anonymous.
Came from.
Yeah. It's funny. So Bruce Spoon wrote a 1951 biographical essay on Sarah Winchester, and he interviewed some of her living workers. He mentioned that she was very selective publicly about her charitable contributions. And what would happen is people would ask her to donate to their charities. She would just refuse and say like, no, I'm not giving out money at this time. And then the charities would later on find an anonymous donation for a much higher figure than what anybody else was giving, and a lot of times higher than what they were asking for.
Oh, wow. She's funny.
So, yeah.
I like that.
Mm-hmm. Now, it's not entirely clear why Sarah's niece, Daisy, wanted to separate herself from her family. But there was obviously some kind of falling out because she ceased all correspondence with her parents. Even years later, when she got married, she refused to contact them, and they remained estranged from her. Perhaps most tellingly, the Merrimans ran into some financial troubles in the 1890s when a blight of phylloxera destroyed their grapevines.
Okay.
Their business never recovered, and by 1896 they filed for bankruptcy. Now, Sarah Winchester, remember, had purchased that house for them. That was El Sueño, the dream, and she didn't bail them out.
Ooh.
She refused.
Ooh.
So she's keeping their daughter at her house. Not keeping, but their daughter is living at her house. And they ran into financial trouble, and Sarah just sort of put her hands up and said, I can't help you.
There must have been something really
Right.
something irreconcilable.
And it's interesting set against the fact that Sarah was obviously donating money to charities and doing so anonymously. And, she it's not that she was a tightwad who refused to give money away.
Yeah.
So I don't know exactly what happened there. We don't have record. It's certainly not the kind of thing that Sarah would be public about.
Well, and, everybody was very tight-lipped in the Victorian era when it came to familial issues.
Yeah, absolutely. Mm-hmm. Yeah. The Merrimans were not the only Americans who suffered financial hardship during the 1890s. Do you know anything about the Depression from the 1890s?
No.
We only know about the Great One, normally, right?
I don't know about that.
Okay, so put yourself in post-Civil War America. Booming economic growth. So by the early 1890s, this growth had started to slow because the mining and railroad bubble bursts.
Oh.
Because if you think about it, post-Civil War, we're moving out west. That was all the Go West young man that we had talked about in the earlier episodes. And as the entire country moves out there, what are they doing for industry? Some are farming, sure. Some, a lot are mining. A lot of people are working on these railroads that are spanning the country. But once the railroad's built, hey, y'all are out of jobs.
Yeah.
Mines get depleted. Mines bust. So there's a real financial hardship that's going on in the 1890s.
Huh.
Then in 1893, wheat prices crashed. And as we mentioned previously, blight struck the California vineyards.
Ooh.
So you're having failing crops at the same time.
So this was a widespread issue.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. This is across most of the country at this point, at least the Midwest to the West. Your businesses begin to fail, and people, of course, what do? They race to the banks, they withdraw money, they apply for loans, trying to keep themselves afloat, right? That depletes gold reserves. And so by the summer of 1893, over 300 banks shut down to try to keep this panic in check because they're running out of gold.
Ooh.
Yeah,
Okay.
and the country, we had never experienced anything like this before. This was completely new territory.
Yeah.
So in an attempt to stem the bleeding, money centers start selling assets and stocks to cover their loans, which push the prices of assets and stocks down, which causes another crash, this one of assets and stocks.
Okay.
And then within a year, there's 15,000 businesses failing, and 15% of Americans' workforce is unemployed.
Damn. And then this is the end of this is right before the 1900s.
Yeah, right.
Sounds like we need to get into a new industry in our country.
Well, you're absolutely right. Yeah.
Sounds like we need to do an industry that perhaps won't die. Perhaps we'll just kind of keep going and paying back and just perhaps never end. It'll iterate, but it'll just never end.
Do you have an industry in mind, EJ?
I do. It's the war industry. I don't know if they get there right away.
We are not going to talk about that. That's a fascinating other little tangent sideline.
It is a little tangent.
I feel like I'm not convinced because we went to war in Mexico first, and then World War I broke out. And I'm not convinced that World War I was solely an economic endeavor for the country.
I'm not convinced
it was a good economic endeavor. But I'm not sure that it was viewed that way at that time, the way that, say, post World War II, we really, really needed war industry in order to keep jobs afloat and keep companies open and all of this, right? The way it is in modern times. The industry that I think comes in and takes place here, like takes over, is actually the oil industry, but it's going to take a little while for it to get on its feet. Because right now, while cars exist, they're not like prevalent. So there's not quite the need for oil. And then what'll happen, and we're jumping way ahead and out of this series, but what happens is the war starts, right? We have the war in Mexico, we have World War I overseas. All of a sudden we need oil. That jump starts the oil industry. And by the time World War I ends, car manufacturing has risen to the point where it can take up the gap. And so there's not really an oil bubble burst post-depression the way there is like a railroad bubble bursting here.
Right. Makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So where we're at in the late 1890s, what follows is a period called the Great Depression until the 1930s when the Great Depression stole that title. But the U.S. Federal Reserve still considers the Panic of 1893 one of the most severe crises in the history of the United States.
How come we never hear about it?
Because the Great Depression kind of took more precedence, I think.
Yeah. And it's something that our grandparents could remember.
Yeah, I guess so.
You know?
Also, this seems to be concentrated in America, where the Great Depression did also hit Europe as well.
Oh, yeah.
So it's a more global phenomena, I think.
That's true. Yeah.
All told, during the Panic of 1893, the U.S. Treasury lost about half its total value. And the Depression would end up lasting 4 years.
Wow.
Yeah. Of course, the Depression hit the Winchester Repeating Arms Company as well, especially because, they were selling a bunch of arms for the war, and now, hey, there's no war anymore. But Sarah's kind of insulated from it, which kind of just goes to show how wealthy she was.
She could take a hit and be totally fine.
Yeah, despite upsets in production and the worst financial crisis that anyone's seen at that time, she had enough to live comfortably and continue to renovate her house.
Putting people to work who probably very desperately needed work.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And it didn't hurt that in 1898, as the recession was ending, her mother-in-law died, and that left her the remainder of the Winchesters' inheritance. I don't know, given all this money, why Sarah didn't just pay off the Merrimans' debts. Or even just, take the house. I suspect, given that Daisy's living situation, the lack of her communication with her parents, there was some kind of falling out there. Whether it came from Sarah by providing that sanctuary or from Belle's side, we don't really know. But Daisy remains with Sarah for 13 years until she gets married in 1903. Consider this, right? You have crop blight, plunging stocks and financial instability, the worst depression the country's ever seen. And in the midst of it, you have a widow and her unwed niece living in their mansion in the middle of town all by themselves. They employ a full army of employees and workers and are still insisting on renovating their estate while everyone around them is losing their jobs. So it's easy to see how the rumor mill begins to churn, right?
Yeah.
Because why else would this wealthy widow be spending her fortune on this?
Unlike all the construction, and then also hiring staff. And
There's gotta be a reason for this constant construction in the midst of this financial crisis. Shouldn't she be holding on to her money?
Yeah, and we didn't really. I'm pretty sure that the Victorian era, didn't have like a very good understanding of mental health. And,
no, not at all.
And I think
we barely have an understanding of mental health now.
True, very true. But I think that the Victorian mind will go to things that are more fantastical rather than the more likely scenario, which is just what's she going through right now.
Well,
like, what is she going through emotionally? Is it an emotional thing?
Right.
Or B, is she just really passionate about building houses.
Exactly.
And are
Yeah.
they somehow connected to each other?
And couldn't they be, right?
Because you can't always divorce your passions from your emotional baggage,
Right.
you know?
Yeah.
But I doubt anybody could have seen that at all.
Of course not.
Yeah.
Of course not. And remember, too, we're coming off of the Fox sisters and this rise in the spiritualism movement at the time as well. So despite Maggie Fox declaring, like, this is the death blow to spiritualism, everything I did was a complete fabrication, blah, 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 you still have all these other spiritualists pretending to communicate with these spirits and all of that. At the same time, you have parlor magicians who are sort of doing the same thing on their end too, and then you have the spiritualists who are using magic tricks to do their spiritualism work and all that stuff. And so spiritualism is very much in the public consciousness at the time.
Yeah.
Seances were a thing that people did for fun.
Right. And especially if, like, we're in a financial crisis, we want answers. We want to know what's happening. We want to know, like, if there's some spiritual connection. Well, I don't know, maybe.
And that there were going to be people who went to consult a medium and say, how can I make sure that my money's not going to deplete? What should I be doing? How can I fix this? Hey, what should I do for my crops? Like, those were totally the questions that you would ask mediums.
It's honestly what people have been doing, cultures have been doing for
sure,
hundreds and thousands of years. Yep. So I know that like Victorian seems a little bit modern in a lot of ways. It's also not. I think they're also still very stuck in their old ways of like what they used to do, what their grandparents used to do and before that, like consulting the stones and consulting the stars. And
well, we still do it now. I mean, how many? Even like with kind of a joke about it, how many times do you look up your horoscope and be like, oh well, this is supposed to be a hard month, they said, whatever.
Yeah, like right? I don't really believe in any of that, but every time I look at it, I'm like, yeah, that makes sense.
Okay, so from the commonplace Victorians' perspective, Sarah's wasting her money. But from Sarah's perspective, she's giving a shit. So Bruce Spoon, we mentioned before, in his 1951 report titled Sarah Winchester and Her House, How a Legend Grows, he interviewed as many of her workers as he could find. Sarah had been friendly with everyone, and she liked to spend time in her garden and talk to them while they worked. When the Depression hit and work dried up for the laborers, she couldn't bear to see them going hungry. So Sarah kept them working. She paid double the average wage. And then she continued to design and build when unemployment raged beyond the gates of her house. She made sure her workers had turkeys on the holidays and gave them presents at Christmas.
Oh my goodness!
In the absence of her family, they became her true family.
Absolutely. Oh my God, that's so sweet.
Yeah. But the outside world didn't see it that way. Take the first few newspaper articles about the house, which start to hit the presses around 1895, in the middle, the pit of the recession. So the San Jose Evening News in March of 1895 ran an article about the property and talked about the continual construction and the reclusive owner. And they said, how is it possible to build on an apparently unfinished house and preserve its aesthetic appearance throughout so many changes is a query that no one can answer, but the fact remains that it continues to be done. The belief exists when work of construction ends, disaster will result, and it is rumored among the neighbors that this superstition has resulted in the construction of domes, turrets, cupolas, and towers covering territory enough for a castle.
So they're talking about superstition now. Interesting.
Yep. The belief exists when work of construction ends, disaster will result.
Who came up with that idea? This newspaper person? This journalist?
The journalist who wrote. I wasn't able to find the person who wrote the article. It didn't seem like they had, that they actually listed the writer at the time. It was all just kind of staff.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. And we can't really know for sure if this is the origin of that idea.
It
could have been a rumor mill thing, and then it got in the paper.
Yeah, I don't know. It's funny. So it obviously didn't come from Sarah, right?
No. Yeah.
She declined to any request for interview, by the way. But it does kind of sound to me like one of those things that you just, they're like the superstitions that you have in your community that aren't really superstitions, but you're like, when When his dog stops barking, hell freezes over or something like that. Like one of those almost hyperbolic comments.
Yeah.
That now is suddenly in print and people are actually reading and taking as gospel.
Right. I kind of want to like push back on something else in there, calling her a recluse.
Okay.
That's not a recluse.
Well,
I know, but I'm just saying, like, okay, maybe she doesn't go out to all the society dinners she's supposed to as a rich person. Maybe she doesn't join all the clubs that you're supposed to join. But she's not a recluse because she's got all these people around her.
Yeah.
I know that they're her workers, but she's not like a true recluse does not have people around you. She goes into the garden and talks to them.
But this is the different thing, though. Again,
yeah,
right?
I know.
Because she is a wealthy heiress. Those aren't the people she's supposed to be associating with.
Oh yeah, their brains cannot handle this.
Right.
This
yeah.
is nuts.
Yeah. She's supposed to be going to the high society dinners. Mm-hmm. She's supposed to be entertaining the presidents, and we're going to talk about that in just a second. But like that's who she's supposed to be dealing with, and she's not, man. She's just not.
Good for her.
Yeah.
Do your thing, Sarah.
This article is the first of its kind, reporting on the mysterious heiress and her evolving estate. Much like the George Spicer Loch Ness Monster crossing the road, this is the first instance of the threat of misfortune being the catalyst for her construction. Sarah's choice to remain out of the public eye likely stemmed from her own health issues. Mary Jo Ignolfo in Captive of the Labyrinth points out that by the turn of the century, Sarah had lost most of her teeth and had crippling arthritis in her hands. She had trouble walking. Remember, we talked about the staircase with all the tiny little steps so she could take it easier, right? She was antisocial to begin with. And these conditions, they are going to drive her to become even more reclusive. Like, she doesn't like to go out in the public where people are going to look at her hands and make comments about her and judge her and all of that.
And it must be difficult to eat around people if you don't have teeth. And what do you do?
Yeah, she didn't like to eat around people.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, that makes her a target for tabloid journalism. And to make matters even worse, when it comes to her public image, just after the turn of the century, Sarah turned down audiences with two different presidents, William McKinley and Theodore Roosevelt.
Wow.
Now, on both of these occasions, they had been touring the area and they wanted to come see her mansion because, it's becoming legendary at this point. But Sarah and Daisy, they're not fucking socialites, right? Mm-hmm. They don't want to do the whole, like, let's set out tea and talk about bullshit and all of that. Like, they just don't want it. And I'm sure they didn't want the fanfare and press. Mm-hmm. Also, it's worth noting that Sarah was a Democrat and they were both Republicans. But Roosevelt was a particularly offensive snub to the public's eye because he had actually been a spokesperson for the Winchester repeating rifle.
Oh, yeah.
Because he's a hunter, right?
Yeah, it's bad business.
Yeah. He actually, in 1895, brought down a rhino in Africa with a Winchester repeater and was very kind of public and outspoken about the gun. And then once he started his campaign, he stopped because he didn't want to be accused of taking Winchester money for his campaign because he cared about that at that time.
Okay, interesting. That's like me like eating a personal pan pizza on like live, whatever, Facebook Live, if people still do that, and being like, hey, I'm eating this personal pan pizza, it's so awesome, and then getting really upset when Pizza Hut doesn't say like, wow, that person's really cool, the way they're eating that pizza. Wow. And I know I'm not Teddy Roosevelt, but it's still weird.
It'd be Twitch, I think.
It'd be Twitch, maybe.
Yeah, you'd have a Twitch stream of eating your personal pan pizza.
Okay. We're old. We don't know.
We'll start a Patreon. We can do that.
There you go.
Eating personal pan pizza.
Yeah, I'll judge them, and I'm sure Pizza Hut will care very much what I have to say. But that's the thing. I guess he's
I see what you're saying,
famous.
though.
I know I'm not famous,
right.
But it's still like, I don't know. It's like nobody owes you anything just because you're.
And I don't entirely know why he thought that she would like love to meet him and talk about his hunting anyway.
Well, that's who he was, though. He was one of those people that really liked to be known as a tough guy.
Yeah.
And he wasn't as tough in the end as he made himself out. Like, he wasn't like that guy.
But it just seems like a strange person to like seek out, to be like, oh, the heiress. Like, Sarah's not going hunting, dude. Whatever.
I think it was just like, hey, like, I'm famous, you're famous.
For sure, yeah.
I'm here, you're here, let's talk.
Right.
I don't blame him for wanting to talk to her. I don't blame him at all.
And then, of course, what happens is the press seizes on this. And her, she closes her gates to Teddy Roosevelt. And they spin that as, well, why doesn't this wealthy heiress want to meet with her most famous spokesperson? The only logical explanation here is that she's ashamed of all the destruction that her husband's rifle has caused, and she's haunted by its legacy. Obviously. Right?
I see, yes.
Has nothing to do with the fact that Sarah doesn't want to take out her teeth and eat and talk about, like, meaningless bullshit in front of you.
Yeah, she's just very uncomfortable.
In 1903, Daisy married Frederick Marriott III, no relation to the hotels, a newspaper editor with a fascination in the emerging automobile industry. Sarah paid for the entire wedding, which was held at the San Francisco Palace Hotel. The wedding's announcement in the paper referred to Daisy as Sarah's adopted daughter.
Aww.
Again, shedding some revealing light on the fallout of the Merrimans and the Winchesters.
Yeah.
Daisy's parents did not go to the wedding.
Scandalous.
Yeah. The newlyweds wanted a house in San Francisco where Fred's newspaper headquarters was located. Undoubtedly, Sarah's feeling lonely, being the only person in her house again. So she begins scouting property in the area as well. She wants to be near her niece. She gets along well with her nephew-in-law, and they seem very happy to have her tag along as well. So Daisy fell in love with a property near El Camino Real, or do you know that translation? Camino Real?
Well, Real means royal, and then Camino is like roadway.
Yep, yeah, the Royal Road. That was a byway that linked 21 different mission churches in California during the Spanish colonial era.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, the idea was that, like, you could establish a series of waypoints for overland travel as you went from San Diego to Sonora, California.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Neat.
They're all about, like, 30 miles apart, which equates to, like, a day's travel. So you would, like, stay in one, get up, travel to the next one on your journey.
That's such a Cormac McCarthy novel right there.
Oh, I know, right?
I so want to get down there so bad.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Sarah bought Daisy's dream house without blinking an eye, totally chill, whatever. I don't know if Rambo helped her buy it or not, or if she's just doing everything herself.
He might have coerced a realtor down to a better price.
Hey, now. Yeah. And shortly after, Sarah bought the house beside that house. She's starting to become something of a shrewd real estate investor at this time. And she keeps watching as neighboring subdivisions come up for sale around their houses. And whenever they come up for sale, she buys it. And then a property next to Daisy's comes up and she buys that, snatching them up. And she ends up restoring the subdivision to a single plot and giving them 45 acres between their two houses.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I love Sarah. I love this.
Now, Sarah, she's still into architecture, but she's kind of into real estate right now. So she bought another house in San Francisco for Fred Marriott to use when he's working in the city.
Oh, that's nice.
And she bought a beachfront section in Coyote Point on the bay side.
Whoa.
And so the idea was that Daisy and Fred, they could, have their time with San Francisco's elite, their social elite. They had their summer home in Coyote Point, and then they could, head out to their Camino Royale estate if they wanted to get out of the city and recharge with a little country living.
Oh, what a life. Okay.
Yeah. And throughout all of this, they're just keeping Sarah company and helping her with her arthritis as she continues to age. Sarah herself really liked Coyote Point. She, jived with it, okay? She's like, I think I need property out there, too. So, I also think, personally, that she got kind of bored with conventional architecture. Much like her Llanada Villa house in San Jose, she was kind of looking for something to be the next, architectural spark for her, right? And luckily, a new trend was on the horizon in affluent society on the other side of the world. Do you want to take a guess what the new housing trend is?
On the other side of the world?
Yeah.
Where in the world?
India.
The new housing trend, huh?
Yeah.
I don't know much about Indian architecture. God, I have no freaking idea, man.
Okay. In 1905, Sarah Winchester commissioned the construction of a houseboat.
Oh, of course. I would have never said that in a million years. Okay,
Yeah.
houseboat. That makes sense.
Yeah. This has been kind of on the rise for the past decade at that point. The story goes that a shopkeeper, Pandit Narayandas, had lost his store in a fire and moved all of his surviving goods onto a boat. And he sold his goods from this floating store while his new shop was being built, and then finally ended up selling the barge to a wealthy European when he was ready to reopen. But with the sale of that barge and that he had been using as a storefront, he realized that there was a whole untapped market here, and he began commissioning houseboats for sale and selling them.
That's so smart.
Yeah.
Nice.
And remember that Sarah Winchester, she's always like got her thumb on the latest architectural trends. They're doing those mismatched windows in the front of their houses and stuff that's like super popular at the time. She's well aware of the houseboat phenomena. Given like the way she's flirting with Japanese gardens, electric lights, it's no surprise that this intrigued her, right? For what it's worth, I don't think she designed the houseboat herself, which is probably for the best, because Sarah's ever-evolving aesthetic probably wouldn't have meshed well with a house that needs to float.
Yeah, that's tough. That's a whole other ball game over there. Yeah.
Now, unfortunately, Sarah's time on her boat was fraught with frustration. First, there was the problem of the Southern Pacific Railroad and its advocate, Oliver Hale. Hale was one of these second-wave railroad men. He's this, like, brash industrialist. You kind of know this guy, right? Like, his mission, he's there, he's going to lay railroad ties all over the West. He's going to create routes of travel, commerce. And so he's got his surveyors, and he sends out his surveyors, and they plan the best routes. And sometimes there's a house in their route, and they're like, okay, well, we're going to buy that land. Yeah, nothing stands in the way of the progress of his like grand railroad design. This kind of guy, right?
Yeah, that guy.
His business model works well enough until his surveyors lay a path that cuts it through the Merriman's Ranch, El Sueño. Now, yeah. Sarah, she owned the property, and she's also, along with Daisy, a very early conservationist. And she's fucking enraged by this.
Even though she doesn't really care about the Merrimans at this moment.
No, but that's her property.
That's still her property.
Yeah, and they're so the other thing was that they're cutting 80 acres of her property, and they were separating the creek from the pastures. So you would have like pasture, railroad, creek.
Nope.
And so it was useless for the livestock, right? And Oliver Hale, being this type of railroad baron, never presented the proposal to her, just drew up, slated it for execution, called it right of way.
What a dick.
So
well, he didn't know that she knew Rambo and Don Draper.
It sucks because despite everything that she did and all the lawyers that she threw at it, there was nothing she could do. So in the end, she failed litigation, and she ends up selling part of her property to the Southern Pacific Railroad, and it gets subdivided. She sold the house to the Chandler Girls' School, and today that land is actually Los Altos, a very upscale neighborhood in Santa Clara. Hale, despite his brazen attitude, or honestly maybe because of it, he was very popular with the general population. He died in 1907 and was met with mournful newspaper articles and this like tearful funeral about how this guy was redefining America, you know, bridging all of these different places together. Yet again, Sarah Winchester's the odd woman out, because she's the person who's digging her heels in and standing in the way of progress, while a popular man is just trying to pave way.
Don't get in the way of my manifest destiny.
Exactly. Yeah. So once again, the papers are kind of like, why is she doing this? Why is she so insistent to stop this man? As her land sale and subdivision takes place, it bothered her. And Sarah starts buying up land in San Francisco. And she's doing all these deals from her houseboat now. She's just living in San Francisco.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
I can just see these little guys in dinghies taking these papers back and forth. She's just like going in circles in the bay.
It's just doing donuts.
Yeah.
I
want that piece of land.
It's funny because she didn't really take it anywhere. It just remained moored in San Francisco Bay at Coyote Point, and she just like lived there and was enjoying, being on the water, I guess. Yeah.
Beach life.
Beach life, right.
Yeah.
By the spring of 1906, she was spending most of her time on her houseboat with Daisy and Fred, who were living in San Francisco.
Is this about the time where Sarah changed her name to Sarah, it's 5 o'clock somewhere, Winchester?
Yeah, she's got her mojitos, you know, she's
She's got her Jimmy Buffett playing.
Right.
She's got her parrot on her shoulder.
Mm-hmm. They're having a good time out there in San Francisco. But in April of 1906, their world is about to change when a massive earthquake hit San Francisco.
Oh, damn.
Yeah.
There was one then. Man.
Mm-hmm. It was a 7.9 on the Richter scale. Ooh. They felt it from the Oregon border all the way to Bakersfield, California. Mm. Over 3,000 people died, and it's estimated that 80% of the city was destroyed.
Damn.
The destruction was made worse by the timing because the earthquake occurred around 5:12 a.m. when people were asleep in their houses.
Oh, yeah.
So first, there was a foreshock that lasted about 40 seconds, shaking the ground, rattling windows in people's homes. Then, 20 seconds later, the actual earthquake hit.
It's so scary. Oh, my God.
Yeah. The Washington Times wrote, "The city was tossed like a feather by the wind. The earth seemed to sink for a moment and then the buildings to rise in the air like a balloon. There was a sort of sinking like no mortal ever experienced a second time. Then the buildings of the town rocked and wobbled like a frail thing in the storm. No city can withstand such a shock."
Holy shit.
And this had never really happened before. Not in like a modern city like this.
Yeah, there were so many people. It's probably very dense at that point.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my God.
And nobody knew what to do. You didn't know how to respond to something like that. So fires are raging out of control in the city. And volunteer firefighters start trying to like put them out and help and fight them. And they block the streets to try to contain the blazes. Mm-hmm. But they can't bring them under control, so they try to make fire breaks. And do you know what a fire break is? Where you'd actually like destroy a building so that the fire won't go past that building.
It's like so the fire like consumes that thing and not anything else.
Yeah. But the problem is they were destroying the buildings with dynamite and they weren't trained. And so they accidentally started more fires. Ooh. Like kind of like a macabre Fahrenheit 451 at this point. And the city ends up burning for 4 fucking days. And it causes more than $300 million in damage.
Oh my God.
Among the destroyed buildings was the Palace Hotel, the venue where Daisy and Fred were married.
That's sad.
Now, we don't know where Sarah was during the earthquake. Documents place her on her houseboat 10 days earlier, April 17th. The prevailing narrative is that she had returned to Yanata Villa and that she was sleeping in her bedroom during the incident. However, this story comes from the Winchester Mystery House's history, and we'll discuss in a bit, but they have a tendency to just kind of make shit up.
Oh, okay.
Whether Sarah was in San Jose at the time or not, her prized property there suffered massive, massive damage. The 7-story tower she designed collapsed.
Oh, God.
Plaster and tiles littered the street and the yard. Porches on her house got destroyed, and all that intricately carved glass was shattered.
Aww.
There were holes where chimneys and walls had stood. And the entire north wing of the house was just reduced to crumbling bricks.
Oh my God. And this was like, her house is how close to San Francisco?
This is San Jose.
Oh, so yeah, right. Okay, so she's in San Jose. Okay, and then but they felt it.
Yanada Villa
everywhere.
was in San Jose.
Yeah.
So that's a 50-mile difference. Where
And it did enough to...
It decimated her house in San Jose 50 miles away. Yeah. And like I said, they felt it all the way to Bakersfield. And Bakersfield is actually almost 300 miles from San Francisco. Sarah's architectural experience, self-taught, didn't really take into account things like earthquakes. I mean, at the time, hardly anybody's did. This wasn't a thing that was on an architect's mind. Her friend, Millie Hall, said, Sarah was so heartbroken after the earthquake damage in 1906. Everything was so neatly kept, and all of those beautiful windows with precious stones were damaged. Mm. According to Bruce Spoon, in his interviews with Sarah's workers, the most logical choice was to seal off the damaged sections and just leave the house as it is. This actually accounts for some of the haphazard features of the house you see today. Like the door on the 3rd floor that opens to nothing but a drop to the ground below.
What?
It also accounts for the staircase to nowhere. This is legendary in the house, right? It's just a staircase goes up to the ceiling and then ends. But that's because they had to seal off a room that was connected to the staircase.
Because it was damaged. Oh my God.
It might also account for the sealed off room that Sarah, quote, forgot about. Large chunks of the property just got blocked off and inaccessible because they were unsafe, and that was the easiest option.
Right.
Remember, Sarah's not spending a whole lot of time at this property anymore. She's got a fucking houseboat. She also has property in San Francisco. Like, she has a house in San Francisco as well. She's just like, she's living her life.
So she sounds to me like a woman who's just completely just like bombarded left and right by spirits, and she just can't escape them. You know, she's just never leaving, and she's really stressed.
You know what's funny is that one of the stories about her living on her houseboat was that she got the houseboat so she could like sail away from the spirits when they caught up with her.
It's really cute. I mean, it's interesting because this is a picture of Sarah that I didn't expect.
Yep.
Her really living her life, being involved with Daisy and Fred, and then the house getting hit by the earthquake, and the whole thing is that she just doesn't want to like.
She just want to repair it. Mm-hmm. She's not living there anymore.
She's not even living there.
Yep. Mm-hmm. The rumor of all of this is that Sarah was at that property. We don't know. We don't know where she was. Mm-hmm. We know that 10 days before she was on her houseboat, but. Yeah. The rumor is that she was sleeping in what's called the Daisy bedroom during the earthquake. This is a room that was designed specifically for Daisy, with a floral motif on huge stained glass windows. Mm. This also just so happens to be one of the rooms that has a door that leads to nowhere, which, of course, is a result of walling off a damaged section. Yeah. Now, according to the legend, Sarah was trapped in the room by falling debris. And she remained there for hours, unable to escape, while workers tried to clear a path to the house and around the door. And this is a story that gets repeated all over the place. But her biographer, Mary Jo Agnolfo, was unable to verify it at all.
Okay, so really we don't know for sure. She could have been there. That could have happened.
There would have been reports of something like that. And we were unable to find. There's a lot of reporting around the destruction, but there's no reporting that places Sarah in that house, at least trapped in that house.
That would have been an important news item.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Despite her own setbacks, Sarah immediately wrote a check to the San Jose Relief Fund before even contacting her attorney about her own repairs. Her donation of $150 would have amounted to about $5,000 today, which was still just a drop in the bucket after that kind of colossal damage.
Yeah.
She is despondent over the state of her flagship home, and so she retreated to her houseboat in San Francisco. And again, she's grieving, and she decides to treat her grief with a good old dose of architectural design. And she starts to build a private wharf for her houseboat.
Oh.
Now, of course, that meant that she couldn't live on the houseboat while it's being built. I don't know why, but she couldn't live on the houseboat. Maybe it wasn't accessible. I don't know. But, you know, she bought another house in San Francisco. This one, a small little Tudor-style cottage.
Very nice. Slumming it. Okay.
Just slumming it, right?
Yeah, right.
2 years go by. More articles begin appearing in various local newspapers, now recontextualizing her houseboat, saying, oh, she purchased that because she knew about the coming California earthquake, and she's following the Noah type of figure, and she's going to get on her ark and sail away after the disaster.
Oh boy, that must have been fun to be a journalist back then.
You just make all kinds of shit up. It didn't matter.
Yeah, it doesn't matter.
Another article in the San Francisco Herald titled "Woman Defies Ghosts in Selling Her House" described her, quote, braving the wrath of spirits. And although Sarah never did sell, the article took plenty of liberty describing the way the various spirits were pestering her day and night and telling her which wing or foundation she had to build next.
Oh boy.
And then another article called her a witch and quoted, like interviewed and quoted some of her occult friends.
Okay. So this is really ramping up here. No wonder we think the way that we do about her today.
Yeah,
really,
all like total bullshit. I don't know who the fuck they interviewed. Sarah didn't even have that many friends, much less occult friends.
Interesting.
Yeah. In reality, Sarah abandoned Yanata Villa after the 1906 quake. No further construction was done on the place aside from what was absolutely necessary to keep it from deteriorating. Her arthritis is getting unbearable at this point, and she just disappears from the public eye altogether. Doesn't even acknowledge any of this spiritualism libel that's happening in the papers, which probably kind of made it worse, too.
I was thinking that.
They're feeding off of that. Like, oh, well, if it wasn't true, why wouldn't she deny it?
Exactly.
By 1915, Sarah was 72, well over the normal life expectancy at that time. She has seen the Civil War and the assassination of Abraham Lincoln, the death of Queen Victoria, the rise of electric lighting, the telephone, the automobile industry, the first airplane flight, and the sinking of the Titanic.
Oh, yeah.
It's quite a life. With declining health, Sarah's thoughts started to turn to her legacy. And so, Sarah, ever the shrewd fucking investor, starts buying bonds. She wants to build her portfolio. She's still adding properties. She's bringing herself to 3 houses across 40 acres in Atherton between San Jose and San Francisco. And that's where she lives for the remainder of her life, supported, as always, by a small collection of diverse workers. She got along really well with Asian immigrants. We talked about that a little bit in the last episode. So she hired a man named Charlie Yen as her groundskeeper. Her personal maid was a Japanese immigrant named Rikitaro Ushiro, whose husband Tomo helped her with landscaping. And her personal cook was a man referred to as Mr. Nakano.
Okay.
As her portfolio grows, so do her charitable contributions. She tended toward anonymous donations. We talked about that. And to the public, they see this as kind of like an Ebenezer Scrooge, where she's holding on to every little cent. But reality, especially later in life, is very, very different. 1909, Sarah found out that the General Hospital Society of Connecticut intended to establish a tuberculosis hospital in New Haven. This is like fate for her. It's a hospital that's treating the disease that took her late husband. Remember, William died from tuberculosis.
Right.
And it's in the town that she grew up in. It's like it's meant to be, right?
Yeah.
So she immediately donated $300,000.
Whoa. $300,000 at that time?
$300,000 at that time.
That's a lot of money, man.
Then 2 years later, she donated $300,000 more.
Oh my God.
Both donations anonymous, and the checks were hand-delivered by her attorney, Frank Lieb. All in all, she ends up donating $1 million to the project across her lifetime.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's really cool.
Yeah. Despite her intentions to remain anonymous, the truth will eventually come out. And at the dedication, the wing was officially christened the William Wirt Winchester Hospital in 1918.
Aw. Is that still what it's called?
No.
Okay.
We'll talk about that a little later.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
It's likely that more charitable donations happened without any paper trail. In my mind, a woman who's willing to drop $1 million on a hospital is probably also giving money in smaller amounts in other places too, right?
She has to be, yeah.
But some of her charitable contributions were more obtuse ideas, and we'll discuss that in just a bit. In 1922, after an extended battle with arthritis, Sarah traveled to Yanata Villa for the last time. Her condition had escalated until her limbs were twisted and frozen in place, virtually immobile. She remained in mostly good spirits with her staff and physician. On September 5th, 1922, Sarah Winchester died in her home in San Jose. She was either 82 or 83. We don't know her birth month. The cause of death was myocarditis, a weak heart. Daisy arranged for Sarah's funeral to be held at her home. In attendance were Sarah's employees and workers, including Tommy Nishihara, her gardener, and his family. Distraught, he wept over Sarah's passing. Shortly after her funeral, he died as well. He never learned that he was named in her will, along with several other employees and caretakers.
Oh, she's so sweet.
$7,000 was set aside for Sarah's employees. This was set up in trusts and paid out over the individual's lifetime. These employees included Tommy Nishihara, who inherited his deceased father's share.
Oh.
The remainder of Sarah's fortune was explicitly laid out in her will. She donated various amounts to the Visiting Nurses Association and the Home for the Friendless, both New Haven-based charities. Some of her liquid cash went to her sister, Belle, who predeceased her, and her niece, Daisy. She also willed several properties to Daisy, including Yanata Villa. Each grandniece and grandnephew received a trust. The vast majority of her wealth was donated to the William Wirt Winchester Hospital, amounting to something in the neighborhood of $3 million.
Whoa.
The hospital served as a military medical hospital during World War I, before becoming an independent tuberculosis clinic. It ran independently until 1948, when it was sold and folded into the Yale School of Medicine. Today, Sarah and William's legacy continues as the Winchester Center for Lung Disease at Yale.
What? Didn't know that. That's cool.
A provision in Sarah's will stated that anyone who contested her wishes would be cut from the will and receive nothing.
Ah, that's badass. I love that.
It's pretty clear that this was to prevent infighting.
Yeah.
And probably also to stop anyone who would attempt to prevent her charitable contributions and her trusts for her employees.
Awesome. There's always those snakes that show up at the end.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So Daisy, the heiress to the Winchester properties, had no interest in becoming a landlord or real estate mogul. So she immediately began subdividing the land. But the San Jose property, Yanata Villa, that's not so easy to sell. This sprawling house can't easily be broken up. It's just this mansion. And the real estate value for it is really, really low, despite being in this prime location in San Jose.
I'm surprised to hear that.
You'd have to raise it to the ground, though.
Why can't a family live there?
It wasn't livable.
It wasn't?
No, it wasn't livable.
Oh.
I mean, they did what they could to keep, make sure everything was safe to walk through and stuff like that. But, I mean, even now, you have a door that you open the door and there's a 3-foot drop. It's not, it would never have passed any kind of inspections. It wasn't safe. It was not good.
Okay.
It was not good.
Yeah, okay.
Enter John Brown, a builder from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. He and his wife Mame were new transplants to California at the time. Prior to their move, the Browns had conducted a very unique business on the East Coast. They built one of the first roller coaster parks in the country.
Really?
Pennsylvania has a very particular industry in Pennsylvania. Do you know what it is?
Well, I do know it has the chocolate industry.
It does have the chocolate industry.
Okay, that's not it. It has Amish wood making skills.
It has coal.
It has coal. That was like low on my list of things to list.
During World War I, Pennsylvania coal mines were pumping out 100 million tons of coal a year, and they were employing over 150,000 workers. John Brown comes from this area. It's interesting to him. Not the mines, but the carts that are used to move the coal out of the mines. He uses this design as inspiration, and he designed and built a very early roller coaster at a resort on the Canadian side of Lake Erie. Now, this wasn't the world's first roller coaster. Do you know what that was? Or where it was?
Coney Island?
Coney Island, yeah. Yeah, the Switchback.
Nice.
Opened in
guess.
1884.
Oh,
very
that's
first roller coaster.
very early.
Yeah.
Okay.
But
Wow.
Brown's design allowed the cars to travel back and forth. And so he called it the Backety Back.
Oh, that's cute.
Safety, at the time, something of an afterthought
Not important.
on roller coasters.
Yeah.
So in 1910, a 17-year-old girl was thrown from the ride and killed.
Oh my God.
We don't know whether John Brown was blamed for that or not, but at some point during the intervening decade, he left Pennsylvania and moved to California with his wife and daughter.
Yep. He's like, oh, I'm just going to go
Just
over
gonna
here
leave.
for a little bit.
We're not going to talk about that. Yeah.
Just got something going on.
And in California, he's continuing to design amusement park attractions. And then the Winchester Mansion hits the market. And Brown saw the opportunity to own an amusement park himself. He didn't have the money to buy the house outright, so he starts leasing the property less than a year after Sarah dies. By May of 1923, the doors opened, and his wife Mame began giving tours of the building and its grounds. And it's likely that she began mixing up the story and embellishing darker details about Sarah's tragedies and their secretive nature and maybe some ghosts and this kind of stuff.
These are amusement park people.
They are.
These are people that, work with carnival acts.
You
and
betcha.
They
Yep.
know what they're doing.
Yeah, you got to bring people in, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, get the narrative going. A year later, on Halloween in 1924, Brown invited Harry Houdini to come tour the property. Now, they didn't find any spirits, they didn't find any trickery, but just the presence of this famed spiritualist debunker made headlines. And the Winchester Mystery House, as they're now calling it, starts to become linked to spiritualism, to seances, to mediums, and ghosts and hauntings, right? The attraction became so successful that Brown bought the property in 1931. As the Great Depression and the subsequent New Deal changes the landscape of America, so does attitude toward Native Americans. Spearheaded by John Collier, the Commissioner of the Bureau of Indian Affairs, the country began to re-examine its policies regarding the removal of indigenous tribes and encourages job growth and education in their communities instead of just, stealing their land. The 1934 Indian Reorganization Act went into effect, allowing the government to allocate land for tribal use. And on these lands now, residents can self-govern, set up businesses, schools, obtain relief money. This is the reservations that we have now.
Oh, how nice of the government to let them do that.
Yeah, I mean, all this seems great on the surface. It never really... Honestly, to his credit, it never really reached the level of success that Collier and other people wanted it to.
Yeah.
But, it did, for all the issues that surrounded it, did go a long way in preserving the land, culture, and heritage of many of the tribes.
Yeah, and that's important. And I just want to
Yeah.
point out that I was being sarcastic when I said, oh, wow, it's so nice that they let them do that.
Yes.
That was sarcasm.
I think our listeners know.
Okay, good. They should, okay, yes.
All of this kind of acts as a doorway into the shifting recontextualization of the previous century. Americans are starting to re-examine their impact on indigenous tribes' life and culture during westward expansion, starting to reconsider maybe Manifest Destiny isn't like the best policy all the time,
Not
right?
so hip anymore.
Yeah.
Not so cool.
Just a few decades ago, we're saying, oh, the West is full of bloodthirsty natives. And now the narrative is starting to focus on white man stealing land from indigenous tribes through violence and manipulation.
Okay, so they're starting to see the truth. That's good.
As America changes its view, the Winchester rifle takes front and center. Oliver Winchester's prized weapon, based on the design by Benjamin Henry, it's no longer the weapon that tamed the West. It's now a tool of imperialism.
Oh, yeah.
It violently overthrew native culture.
Yeah.
Right? Mm-hmm. And the perfect foil for this changing narrative is Sarah Winchester. A woman, right? The heiress of a bloody legacy. She's locked away in a chaotic house by the souls lost to her family's creation.
Right, locked away, not on her houseboat, going in circles.
Yeah, donuts in her houseboat, baby.
Yeah, she's not doing that at all.
No, now she's racked with guilt over the dead. She's hiding in her mansion, you know. She's trying to escape her responsibility.
Right, because it's all her fault being born into this family and, you know, having nothing to do with any of it.
That narrative continues today. Truthfully, we have no indication that Sarah ever felt guilt over her family's weapon business. But it's an easy mold to put her in, and one that dovetails really nicely with her reclusive lifestyle and her ever-growing mansion. John Brown is likely responsible for the famous stories of the property, like Sarah's obsession with the number 13. Mm-hmm. This was confirmed by James Perkins, one of Sarah's carpenters, who stated that, quote, "The number 13 in chandeliers, the number of bathrooms, windows, ceiling panels, and other things were certainly put in after Mrs. Winchester died."
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
yeah.
Interesting.
The only reference to 13 in Sarah's day was the sink drain covers, which had 13 holes in them.
Wow, sink drain covers? Mm-hmm. They're really important in
Superstitious,
spiritualism.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So 13,
that's where the ghosts poop.
But 13 chandeliers. Ghost
You
poop
can't
in your
be serious.
sick?
Yes. 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 That's why they're so annoying. That's why they need to go. You can just see them squatting there looking at you. Sorry. I just picture a ghost perching and pooping and staring at you.
So the 13. My God. If you read about 13 chandeliers, if you read about 13 windows, if you read about 13 steps, anything like that, that was all put in after Sarah's death. In fact, the first article referencing her obsession with the number 13 was published in 1929, 5 years after her death.
Oh, goodness. Yeah, there are a lot of numerology things out there about Sarah Winchester and all this. And given all of the repairs that had to happen to the house over the years and all the people that had their hands on it, like, you can't say, I mean, it's...
No way.
Yeah. I mean, you actually can't, because you can date when things were put in, but it seems to be overwhelmingly that she died and then this happened.
What happened is John Brown moved in and somebody else we're going to talk about in just a second, and they made their own changes to the house to make it seem spookier. In the 1960s, Walt Disney and Imagineer Ken Anderson visited the Winchester Mystery House.
Who the hell are they?
Never heard of them before.
Never heard of them.
There had been plans for some kind of spooky attraction in Disneyland at Anaheim. And Walt Disney himself was very inspired by the helter-skelter kind of nature of Yanada Villa. Disney opened his haunted mansion in 1969, and it became an instant success. Imagineer and mansion designer Roy Crump credits the attraction for the birth of the modern haunted attraction industry. Meaning haunted houses around Halloween, tours, hay rides, that sort of thing.
So that was a thing that wasn't super popular until like...
Didn't really exist at the time. Yeah, but this whole notion of like going to a haunted house and touring through it was inspired, was sort of created by Disney and the Haunted Mansion, which was inspired by Sarah Winchester's house.
It seems like Disney like industrialized it.
They did. Yeah.
Where, like, I think the idea of the haunted house has been around for a long time.
Yeah.
And, like, creepy places.
Oh,
and
absolutely.
Creepy hotels and all this stuff. But But yeah, that sounds like, okay, so that's like probably the first.
Yeah, the industrialization of it. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, there's a whole fascinating side conversation that we don't need to get into in depth right now, but that what happened is you had all these Victorian mansions that were purchased and built and constructed and all of this stuff. And then as these subsequent depressions hit, they weren't able to afford their mansions, and the mansions started to crumble and decay, kind of like what's happening with Sarah Winchester's at the time, right? And that's where we get this notion of like the haunted Victorian crumbling mansion from, is that the fall of the Victorian time era.
Like the Gilded Era?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, the end of that coming into a more modern age.
Yeah. Interesting.
After John and Mame Brown died, the Winchester Mystery House transferred to Keith Kittle in 1973. Kittle had previously worked at Frontier Village in Disneyland, and that made him something of an authority not only on amusement parks, but also on the mythology of the Old West. So Kittle's time at Disneyland also happened to coincide with the opening of the Haunted Mansion, meaning that he had a very particular insight into how to run a spooky attraction and turn ghosts into business. And it's all set against this backdrop of the mythical Old West.
Wow, they really had the right people for the job.
It really did, right?
Damn.
Kittle piggybacks off the burgeoning Halloween horror industry created by Disney and set up black and red billboards along the highway. And he made the Mystery House a tourist destination and rewrote the entire tour script, this time with a focus on ghosts and spirits.
So they really made this super kitschy.
Yeah.
Like it was in my head. This was not always like this. In my head, it was like I don't know, just like a creepy old house that maybe there's some ghost stories around it.
Yeah, kind of more like getting to go visit an old mansion or something like that.
Like history and a little mystery. But this
Kittle,
is like
Kittle is the guy who transformed it into like a tourist trap almost.
Yeah, sounds like it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is during these things are popping up at the time, right? This is where you have Route 66 and all the things that are springing up along Route 66, all these little attractions that people are pulling off the road and going to because people are going on road trips because everybody's got cars and right? Yeah,
sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Today, Sarah Winchester is best known for her sprawling mansion of oddities, a madhouse designed to keep vengeful spirits at bay. And in her own way, she's become exactly what the stories have made her out to be. A woman imprisoned in a mystery house, haunted by the ghosts of the past. If you want to visit her and her labyrinthian estate, all it costs is a trip to San Jose and the ticket price at the door. Although my cousin went there and said it's overpriced. But the true story of Sarah Winchester is so much greater than the ghost tales told inside the walls of her house. It's the story of a woman born into a world of architecture, but unable to participate in it. It's the story of a widow surrounded by grief who soothed herself through artistry and creation at the sacrifice of her own fortune. She maintained an army of builders when unemployment was at its highest and contributed anonymously to charities and causes that have likely been lost to history. Her portfolio included expansive real estate properties, stocks, bonds, and houses designed and renovated to her own particular specifications. The true story of Sarah Winchester is the story of one of the greatest female philanthropists in American history. She left an indelible mark not only on the California landscape, but unintentionally on the fabric of American spiritualism. The daughter of a carpenter with the soul of an architect, she created one of the most iconic houses in the world. This is how she deserves to be remembered. Not surrounded by ghosts, but by handwritten blueprints scrawled on napkins and tablecloths.
Yay!
Yeah.
Yay, Sarah Winchester. She's fucking cool.
There you go.
I didn't know she was so cool.
She's awesome.
I thought she was just some old lady locked up in her crazy, sprawling mansion, scared of ghosts. And then I come to find out that she's actually, like, probably somebody that I would love to hang out with and learn from.
Yeah.
She kind of does all the things that I wish I could do if I were rich. I don't know. I don't know what she did for conservation, but that's really important to me. And like,
they donated a bunch of money to redwood conservation. That was
that's
one of the things
great.
that Daisy was really into.
oh, that's amazing.
Yep.
That's like, I don't know. I just think that's super cool. And I feel like we don't really know that about her, like on an everyday basis.
Yeah.
You know, she's not ubiquitous with that. So that's really cool about her.
What I love about her is that she, we've talked about it the whole time. She took her grief, she turned it into creation, even though she didn't necessarily know what she was doing, but she figured it out.
Yeah.
I mean, I would not have been able to just build a house like that.
No way.
You
No,
know?
I mean, so few of us would, and I mean, she had good people with her. I think helping her out and everything, right? Like,
For sure,
They were doing the building, and she was doing the ideas.
she was friendly with them, and I'm sure that Sarah had conversations. She's sitting in the garden, she's talking to these people. They're also going to be talking about the construction.
Yeah.
I would love to just go back in time and sit there and listen to her talk to like a couple carpenters while they're doing work there and see what they're talking about.
Yeah.
Because she's not talking about like hats with them, right? She's
No.
not talking about like floral dresses with them. She's talking about like fucking soffits and shit, right?
What a weird woman.
Yeah.
Whatever happened to Rambo? Don Draper.
Don Draper, you mean John Hamm?
Yeah, I mean John Hamm.
John Hamm made out with like what did he get? $12,000 for his estate,
Very good.
and I don't know, went away and lived his life.
Okay.
Ned Rambo was a sales associate. I assume that he just continued his time at the Winchester company selling rifles. And of course, today,
Yes.
Winchester is still a very successful company. It's not. The story isn't really about Winchester. I think we all know that Winchester is still a successful firearm company today. The story is about Sarah Winchester.
Yeah, nor is it about really the ghosts. We didn't really talk about any. There are plenty of stories that are out there.
There's a
about
lot.
the house.
Yeah, they say that there's a workman who pushes a wheelbarrow
he
through
cleans up
it.
the fireplace.
All kinds of stuff like that. But what you have to understand is that these were all stories that were created either by John and Mame Brown or Kittle.
Yeah, they were all
in the subsequent years. Like these stories have no real basis in any fact.
It's crazy.
People didn't die there. No workers died there. The only person who died there was Sarah Winchester. If there's any haunting there, it's only Sarah Winchester haunting.
Yeah.
The stories are all rhetoric that was created by people who were trying to create amusement attractions. It's what it's always been. And that's all because the property was basically unsellable. Because honestly, Daisy offloaded it for a very, very fair price. And now, I mean, it's worth millions.
Seriously. Man, Daisy and Fred, they're smart. I mean, not that they were manipulative. I don't think they were manipulative to get close to her to get her money, but they made out pretty well in the end.
They took really, really good care of her in her later years.
That's good.
As she was declining in health. And it seems like they never... obviously she gave them a lot, right? She bought a lot of houses for them and stuff like that.
She took care of Daisy.
Yeah.
Like her family was not there for her, and she was, and that's just a nice. Yeah. That's just a nice family relationship.
And there again, like, we don't really know what happened there. There was some kind of fallout of some sort, but we don't really know.
Cool.
That's the story of Sarah Winchester.
That's it. Okay, and it's Halloween time almost, so
we're
it's
getting into
scary
Halloween.
Time. Yay.
Yeah, we've broken into October at this point.
Yes, which means more scary stuff. Okay.
So definitely stick around for that. I have a quote from Eileen Gray that I'm going to end with.
Okay, go for it.
You know Eileen Gray at all?
Nah.
Okay. She's a famed Irish architect and furniture designer.
Oh, cool.
So I'll leave you with a quote from her, modified slightly by me. A house is not a machine to live in. It is the shell of a person, their extension, their release, their spiritual emanation. Not only its visual harmony, but its organization as a whole. The whole work combined together make it human in the most profound sense.
Oh, that's beautiful. Very well said.
There you go.
Very true. We're just snails. We need our shells.
We're just snails.
Yeah.
Yep.
I summed it up for her. I made it a little bit more succinct. We're just.
She'd appreciate that.
I'm sure she would. Very deep. I made it a little deeper and quickened it for her. You know.
EJ, we're all just snails.
We're all just snails. You can quote me on that.
Amazing. Well, thank you for listening, everybody.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to Slaying Monsters. If you like the podcast and what we do, please share it with others or leave us a rating and review. For questions, suggestions, and other feedback, reach out to us, slayingmonsterspodcast@gmail.com, and stay up to date by following us on Instagram @slayingmonsterspodcast. Your support helps us grow, and we are truly grateful to have our listeners and community.